Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of the PODTIME Podcast, a show where we talk about the lives, experiences, and opinions of correctional officers to give you an inside view to what really happens inside of prisons. My name is Officer Edwards. I'm a correctional officer of just over 2 years. I am still pretty new to the whole corrections thing, but I have worked all 3 custody levels, minimum, medium, and closed custody for a good amount of time each. I feel like I've got a pretty good roundabout knowledge, or at least a surface knowledge of what's going on. I try to keep myself up to date with current politics and news inside of prisons. And for people who may not know or are new to it or just want to kind of hear other people's opinions on what they're experiencing as well inside of prisons, this is for you. My name is Officer Edwards. I don't know if I've said that already. I'm still new to the podcasting thing as well. But Officer Edwards, I've made a Facebook post a couple days ago asking people what they would want to hear on the first podcast. And I got a couple things here just to kind of list through them. Is it as bad as most people think? What is my prison in my state specifically doing about COVID? Secret communications between offenders, like passing notes and kites and stuff like that. Poor leadership and morale. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Is it as bad as most people think? No. At least in the 3 facilities that I've worked in, that never have been anywhere near as bad as what you see on TV and the movies. But that should be pretty obvious to most people, even though that is the question I get asked the most. Is it like what you see on TV and the movies? And it's not. It's changed a lot. You hear a lot about prison reform, and that's kind of what this is doing. It's kind of pushing prisons in a new direction where it's not as much about punishing them while they're in prison as much as punishment being prison itself. So what I've been told through these academies is we're not there to punish these guys. They're already being punished by being sent to prison. We're there to pretty much make sure they don't hurt each other, themselves, try to set them on a right path. They tell us we're trying to rehabilitate them. That's part of our job. And, there's only so much you can do with that. Some people, you gotta want to be rehabilitated to be rehabilitated. So no, it's nowhere near as bad as most people think. Just in terms of, uses of force. I've only had one use of force in just over 2 years. And that was when an offender was trying to fight me. Other than that, I pretty much can talk my way out of it, any kind of situation with an offender, because it's never ever anything serious. They get mad at you for turning off their microwave at lockdown time, and that, it can boil down from I'm turning off your microwave because you need to lock down, all the way to, it could get up to you sprayed him, it was a staff assault. It just depends. So it's not as bad as most people think. You do have bad days, and it is still very dangerous. It's a very dangerous job because you are around convicted felons all day. Not all of them violent, but the ones that are still can tend to be pretty violent. So when it comes down to it, I would never tell anybody. I would never say that it's just like what you see in the movies, because it's not. It's pretty chill most days. You don't really do much on your days in. You don't get into a lot of trouble. You just kind of sit around, make your rounds, do your cell searches or locker searches, whatever your facility has, and you go about your day. more than anything, you find contraband or illegal materials in prison. So you do find quite a bit of drugs, drug paraphernalia, and if you're a real stickler about the rules, which you kind of have to be nowadays, you know, unauthorized clothing, appliances, altered things, all kinds of stuff you got to look out for. But a lot of people, a lot of officers would agree with me when I say that these guys in prison have more rights than the officers in prison do. They get, a little more lenience with what they're allowed to do versus us. And that's reasonable because we're held to a professional standard. We're supposed to act a certain way while in a professional setting. And if you don't do that, it kind of makes everybody within the department and yourself especially look bad. So no, not as bad as people think. You're held to a different standard, that's for sure, as the offenders, inmates, prisoners, whatever you call them, are held to. It's all about how professional you are, honestly. If you're a straight professional person, you are good with your words, you can talk to people pretty easily, you don't have like this ego or complex that's saying like this badge on your shirt gives you this power and you have to abide by that power. You don't have to be like that. A lot of officers are, and that's okay. I just personally don't do it myself. I know what I'm worth. I know what I'm about. So these guys know that, know what I'm about, know who I am. And that's pretty much how the end of that one goes. The next little point I have here, kind of a whole different direction, is the COVID cases. What is my facility doing for COVID? Well, my facility itself has been pretty lucky with COVID. We've only had one quarantined who had symptoms, and actually just the other day they sent one out to get tested. So this is like the first COVID case we might be seeing in my facility. I am recording this in mid-May. So, when this all started, beginning of March, mid-March, my facility hasn't changed operations. They've canceled like the programs and they've changed recreation times around a little bit, but there's been no cases at my facility, so nothing really has changed with the offenders. But that could change here, in the next couple hours if they find out this guy actually has it, and then there'll be some modified operations for sure. Along with the COVID cases, I get asked a lot, are they releasing offenders? I can honestly say I don't exactly know how that works. My assumption on it all, purely assumption, is just that not even an assumption, what I'm guessing is that they're only releasing minimum custody level offenders who have less than a year left. And they're not like on some strict violent offender, whatever. Releasing offenders, my facility isn't. I think that's more county jails releasing people rather than the state and federal level prisons. They're not, as far as I know, those are the stipulations for releasing offenders. And it is probably different everywhere. Some states may not even be releasing offenders, which is even better. But these ones that are getting released, will they have to finish their sentence at a later date? I would assume no, that their early release wouldn't be a full release as much as it would be like a probation. So they're let out on parole or probation for the remainder of their term. If they have less than a year left, like without probation, parole, I'm not sure. They might be. But as far as I know, that's more of like the county jails releasing people more than just the state prisons. Yeah, so COVID is definitely affecting a lot of places. I know the first facility I worked at in another state, it was a minimum custody camp, and I was just talking to one of the officers over there the other day, and they said that it's running like a closed custody facility. So it is affecting a lot of people. They're going to have, a lot of these officers and offenders are having to change the way they do their daily lives and how they can kind of affect contamination within the prison. We all have to wear masks. We tried to have the offenders wear masks. It was about 50-50. Half of them were all for the masks, and the other half just flat out refused. It did result in a couple of incidents where the facility was trying to enforce the mask policy, and it lasted maybe a day and a half. Some people don't care. They don't care if they catch it. Even if an offender did catch it, it would, automatically, it's staff. Staff brought it in. Staff's trying to kill us with all this virus. The only way we're going to catch it is through staff, which the last part, we're only going to catch it through staff. That's a pretty solid argument, because if they've shut down all of transports and transfers between these prisons, who else would have an outside contact to bring it in even? And it is officers. But the one that they're testing at my facility right now transferred here from the receiving facility right before it all broke out, and right before that receiving facility diagnosed their first case. So that's what we're dealing with, is trying to, A, does he have it? B, what are we going to do if he does? We only have one of 6 units locked down, like quarantined, until we get the results back from that test. So that's, and if he comes back positive, they'll probably put the entire facility on a quarantine lockdown until, wherever the CDC regulations are. Another talking point, the transitions here really suck. So all I did for these was, I went through the Facebook posts and texts and everything people had sent me, and I just wrote them down. I didn't put them in any specific order. I probably should have. But we're going down to secret communications between offenders. Now that's a good one. Secret communications between offenders are something we watch very heavily in the prison system. We watched notes passed, telephone communications. Sometimes they're really sneaky with those. But the most common way that offenders actually talk to each other, besides, just passing notes, is through outside family members, especially when these guys are affiliated with a street gang. Usually their families are involved as well. So they'll have their families contact these other guys' families to give them, information back and forth. While they're locked down, we can kind of catch notes, but it's a little harder. I know at the minimum custody camp it was really easy, because the only time they really passed notes is when they were in a restrictive housing setting. Because other than that, they're free to roam 24/7.